Underneath the polished sheen of Celestial Air's first-class cabin, a quiet storm brews the moment Samantha Taylor confronts a seemingly out-of-place elderly couple. A clash of authority and dignity unfolds, revealing that strict protocol may hide deeper biases, ones powerful enough to shake this flight to its core. What hidden tensions will explode when decades of refinement meet unexpected defiance? Let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Ring the bell to stay updated on our journey. The flight from Evergreen City to Meridian was set to be a routine journey in luxury. In the pristine first-class cabin of Celestial Air, every detail gleamed with perfection, from the gleaming tray tables to the precisely arranged magazines. At the heart of this controlled environment was Samantha Taylor, a seasoned flight attendant renowned for her strict enforcement of Celestial Air's high standards. With crisp uniform and unwavering confidence, Samantha believed that the first-class cabin was her domain, a sanctuary where only the most refined travelers belonged. On this seemingly ordinary day, as the cabin buzzed quietly with anticipation, an unexpected scene unfolded. An elderly couple stepped into the cabin, their faces lighting up with quiet excitement at the prospect of a long-awaited vacation. Harold and Mildred Anderson, both dignified and poised, had traveled together for decades and now looked forward to a peaceful escape. Yet, to Samantha's trained eye, their appearance did not fit the typical profile of first-class travelers. Without hesitation, Samantha approached them. In her mind, first class was a realm reserved for passengers who met a certain standard of modern elegance, rules that she was determined to uphold. She briskly informed the couple that their seating arrangement did not conform to the airline's strict protocols. Shock and confusion flickered across Harold and Mildred's faces as Samantha, with a firm tone and an authoritative air, insisted that they be separated, directing them to sit in different areas of the cabin. Harold exchanged a perplexed look with Mildred as they tried to process the sudden imposition. They had booked their premium seats months in advance, excited to share a journey together, yet now they were being told that they could not remain side by side. The couple's anticipation for the vacation quickly turned into quiet distress. Other passengers in the cabin began to notice the commotion, and whispers rippled through the elegant space. Unbeknownst to Samantha, her rigid enforcement of protocol was about to set the stage for events that would upend her carefully maintained order. As the cabin's atmosphere shifted from calm luxury to uneasy tension, Harold and Mildred stood as symbols of dignified defiance, their quiet perseverance hinting at a deeper significance that Samantha had completely overlooked. This seemingly routine encounter marked the beginning of a dramatic journey, a journey that would force Samantha to confront her own biases and question the very essence of what it means to serve. For now, she remained convinced that she was merely upholding Celestial Air's standards, unaware that her actions would soon reverberate with far-reaching consequences. Harold and Mildred Anderson had long looked forward to this vacation. After years of working hard and weathering life's many challenges, the prospect of a peaceful journey in Celestial Air's luxurious first class filled them with hope. They had carefully planned every detail, excited to share this special time together, a quiet retreat from the everyday chaos. The anticipation of reuniting in that opulent space had been the highlight of their travels. Yet, as they stepped into the first-class cabin, a chill of confusion washed over them. The cabin, usually a place of quiet comfort, was buzzing with attention they couldn't quite place. It wasn't long before they encountered Samantha Taylor, the stern-faced flight attendant known for her no-nonsense approach. Without a hint of warmth, Samantha briskly approached Harold and Mildred, her eyes scanning them with a critical gaze that betrayed no hint of kindness. "Sir, madam," Samantha said sharply, "I must inform you that your seating does not comply with our current assignment." Her voice left no room for discussion. Harold, holding his boarding pass with quiet dignity, tried to explain, "Our tickets clearly indicate first class, and we've been expecting to travel together." But Samantha was unmoved by their calm explanation. She insisted that the couple's appearance did not match the profile of those who typically occupy first-class seats, and that, in accordance with strict protocol, they were to be seated apart. Mildred's eyes filled with confusion as she gently squeezed Harold's hand. They had saved for this trip, choosing these seats to relish a shared journey, yet now they were being told to separate. The couple attempted to reason with Samantha. "We booked our tickets well in advance. "Please, let us sit together," Mildred pleaded, her tone soft but resolute. However, Samantha's expression remained cold and unyielding. "Rules are rules," she replied curtly. "I must adhere to the assignment. Please follow my instructions." As the minutes passed, the cabin's atmosphere grew increasingly charged. Other first-class passengers began to notice the unfolding drama. Some looked on with sympathetic expressions, while others exchanged concerned whispers. The once harmonious environment now thrummed with unease. Harold and Mildred tried to maintain their composure, though their faces betrayed a deep sense of disappointment. They had expected a smooth, enjoyable flight, but instead, they found themselves caught in a situation that questioned their right to be there. Despite their calm responses, Samantha's insistence on separating the couple felt like an imposition of authority without understanding. The situation escalated when she began to question the validity of their tickets, suggesting that there might be a mistake in the booking system. Harold, ever polite, produced his boarding pass and calmly reiterated, "Our tickets are valid, and we have every right to remain together." But Samantha's eyes, hardened by an unyielding commitment to procedure, narrowed in disapproval. She demanded once more that they relocate to different seats, her tone growing more imperious with each word. The conflict reached a boiling point as Mildred, in a final act of quiet determination, requested again, "Please, we've been looking forward to this trip together. Isn't there any flexibility?" Her plea was met with a dismissive shake of the head from Samantha, who replied, "I'm sorry, but I must enforce the rules." The rejection stung deeply, and for a moment, the couple's hopeful excitement was replaced by a palpable sense of injustice. Throughout the cabin, other passengers began to feel the ripple effects of the altercation. The whispers became louder, and some even began recording snippets of the interaction on their phones. The general mood shifted from one of anticipation to one of discomfort and quiet outrage. Harold and Mildred exchanged looks that spoke of years of shared resilience that had carried them through hardships, but now was being tested in a very public way. As the tension in the cabin escalated, Harold, who had always been the calmer of the two, sent a discreet message from his phone. His message, though wordless to the casual observer, hinted at a forthcoming response that would eventually upend the strict order Samantha was so desperate to maintain. He knew that something wasn't right about their treatment. His quiet dignity contrasted sharply with the rigidity of the flight attendant's enforcement. In the midst of this charged atmosphere, the couple could not help but feel that there was more to the situation than a mere booking error. They sensed that Samantha's actions were rooted in an unyielding ideology, one that placed rigid boundaries on who belonged in first class. Unbeknownst to them, this would soon become a turning point that would shake the very foundation of the flight, and ultimately, challenge the deeply held beliefs of everyone on board. By the time the cabin lights dimmed for the meal service, the unresolved tension between the couple and the flight attendant had become the focal point of whispered conversations. The Andersons, as Harold and Mildred were known, had accepted their fate with quiet dignity, but the injustice of being forcibly separated weighed heavily on their hearts. Their long-planned vacation, once a symbol of hope and rejuvenation, was now marred by an incident that exposed the rigid, sometimes callous application of rules. In the ensuing hours, as the flight continued its journey through the skies, the consequences of that early confrontation would ripple through the cabin, setting the stage for revelations that neither the Andersons nor Samantha could have foreseen. The incident was not merely a clash over seating arrangements, it was a microcosm of a larger battle between rigid authority and the need for compassionate service. The seeds of transformation had been sown, and the flight was about to become a catalyst for change. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale, please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and ring the bell to stay updated on our latest content. Samantha Taylor carefully maneuvered a drinks cart down the aisle, her expression neutral despite the turmoil churning within. Ordinarily, she would glide through the first-class cabin with unshakable confidence, greeting each passenger by name, reciting their usual beverage choices from memory. But today, the tension that weighed on her heart made every step feel labored. Only an hour had passed since she had insisted on separating Harold and Mildred Anderson, the elderly couple who had boarded with matching smiles and quiet excitement. It had been an ordinary directive at first, ensuring passengers were seated according to the manifest, maintaining an orderly cabin environment. Samantha had done this countless times, and usually, it was met with simple compliance. But this time felt different. There was something about Harold and Mildred's poised demeanor and the gentle, sorrowful gaze in Mildred's eyes that pricked at Samantha's conscience. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had overlooked something important, a sense of dignity that transcended her usual categorization of fit or unfit for first class. Now, the first-class cabin was weighed down by an awkward hush. Passengers who had witnessed the initial confrontation between Samantha and the Andersons exchanged uneasy glances. Samantha tried to maintain her professional facade, but a ripple of guilt made her feel every pair of eyes on her, scrutinizing her every movement. She stopped at the row where Harold was quietly reading a magazine. He looked up, his gaze calm yet distant, acknowledging her presence with a slight nod. She forced a polite smile, offering him a drink menu. He declined softly, returning his attention to his reading without another word. Across the aisle, Mildred sat alone, her posture stiff with an unspoken sadness. A kind-faced passenger beside her attempted to engage her in conversation, likely sensing the tension in the air, but Mildred only offered polite, one-word answers. Samantha's chest tightened at the sight. She had inadvertently caused this rift. She, who prided herself on maintaining the high standards of the airline, had managed to create an environment of discomfort for the very travelers she was supposed to be serving. During the next half hour, Samantha busied herself with routine tasks. Yet every time she glanced at Harold or Mildred, the sense of disquiet deepened. Something about their quiet acceptance of the situation made it even worse. If they had been angry or combative, Samantha might have found it easier to justify her stance. Instead, they carried themselves with the grace of people who had faced far more serious trials in life, as though this offense, while painful, was simply one more hurdle they would endure together. The self-realization dawned on her slowly. Samantha's enforcement of the airline's strict seating policy wasn't purely about following rules. Part of her had, in that moment, seen an elderly couple and assumed they were out of place in the luxurious first class, an almost unconscious bias that first class was meant for a certain type of traveler. She had conflated the guidelines with her own sense of who belonged there, and that was the heart of the problem. As the plane flew steadily through the clouds, Samantha retreated to the small crew station at the front of the cabin. She took a moment to compose herself, thinking back to the professional code she had sworn to uphold. She remembered her training, which emphasized empathy, flexibility, and understanding in passenger interactions, principles she seemed to have momentarily forgotten in her pursuit of rigid control. She wondered why the couple hadn't contested her more vehemently. Possibly, they were used to facing assumptions and prejudice from people who saw only their age, or perhaps they trusted that Samantha would realize her mistake without confrontation. The thought made Samantha's stomach churn with guilt. Harold's polite acceptance of her directive, Mildred's quiet heartbreak. These were not the responses of people who were ignorant of how first class was supposed to operate. They were people with dignity, people who had earned the right to sit together and enjoy the fruits of their labor. Samantha had taken that from them, all because she was blinded by her own preconceived notions. The cabin lights dimmed slightly in preparation for a meal service, and Samantha decided to walk the aisle once more, offering passengers the menu and a few kind words. She found Harold again, looking out the window at a spectacular sunset. The warm glow of the sun's final rays illuminated the fine lines on his face, a testament to a life of experiences and wisdom. For the first time, Samantha truly noticed how gentle he seemed. He was not an unruly passenger, not a threat to first-class decorum, he was simply a man who wanted to travel in comfort with his wife. The burden of her behavior weighed heavily on her mind, and for a fleeting moment, she considered pulling him aside to apologize. But the presence of other passengers and the concern that she might be seen as indecisive or incapable held her back. Instead, she offered a soft greeting and moved on. In her heart, she knew it wasn't enough, but she couldn't bring herself to address the issue so publicly yet. As the hours crept by, Samantha noticed her colleagues casting worried glances in her direction. Some offered supportive smiles, as if to say, "We've all been there," but she felt no comfort in the gesture. She was used to being the unwavering force of authority among her peers. Now, she was simply uncertain, quietly unraveling under the weight of her own conscience. Later in the flight, as she passed by Mildred's row again, she noticed the woman had fallen asleep, her face turned toward the aisle, her expression etched with exhaustion. The passenger seated beside her had kindly moved to another row, giving Mildred some space. The empty seat next to her, which should have been occupied by Harold, served as a glaring reminder of the situation Samantha had created. In a moment of spontaneous resolve, Samantha gently placed a blanket over Mildred's shoulders, a small gesture of care that felt like the first step toward righting her wrongs. The older woman stirred slightly, blinking up at Samantha in confusion before offering a faint, appreciative smile. Samantha tried to smile back, but the guilt weighed too heavily, and she turned away, tears of regret threatening at the corners of her eyes. Time seemed to move in slow motion. Samantha alternated between assisting passengers, avoiding Harold and Mildred's gaze, and replaying every misstep in her head. She recalled how eagerly the couple had boarded, how they had exchanged delighted whispers upon entering the first-class cabin, as though it were a dream come true. She remembered how they had kindly shown her their tickets, how they hadn't raised their voices or demanded an explanation. They had simply accepted their seats apart from each other, their disappointment settling like a quiet storm. The realization cut deeply. Samantha had robbed them of a simple joy. She had placed her authority above their right to be treated with respect. In her mind, first-class travelers were supposed to fit a certain profile, young, stylish, modern, and Harold and Mildred, with their unassuming clothes and gentle demeanor, didn't meet that preconceived image. She felt a pang of shame at the thought that she had acted as gatekeeper, as though it was her call to decide who belonged. Finally, Samantha knew she couldn't live with the tension any longer. She retreated to the flight deck and quietly informed the lead flight attendant that she needed a moment to gather her thoughts. With a sympathetic nod, the lead attendant took over Samantha's station, leaving her free to collect herself. Samantha found an unoccupied row near the back of the plane where she could breathe, away from the scrutinizing eyes of the first-class cabin. She drew in a deep breath, recalling the training manual that emphasized the airline's core values: respect, empathy, compassion, and service. Each value now felt like a glaring mirror reflecting her failure. She knew what she had to do, but the fear of confrontation gnawed at her. Would the couple even want to hear her apology? Would they forgive her? Eventually, summoning her courage, Samantha returned to the first-class cabin and approached Harold. He was once again gazing out the window, a peaceful but somewhat sad expression on his face. Samantha cleared her throat, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "Mr. Anderson," she began, her tone quieter than usual. "I'd like to talk to you about earlier. Is that okay?" Harold looked at her with mild surprise, then nodded. "Of course," he said kindly, placing his magazine down on the tray table. Samantha's heart pounded as she tried to find the right words. She wanted to explain, to tell him that she hadn't intended to be cruel, that she had merely been following what she believed were the airline's strict procedures. But she also knew that was just an excuse. Her judgment had played a role, and no procedure mandated splitting up an elderly couple without cause. I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she managed, her eyes downcast. "I shouldn't have assumed you and your wife were out of place. I let my notions of who belongs in first class overshadow my duty to serve you." A flicker of something, understanding, perhaps, passed across Harold's face. He gave a small nod but didn't speak, as though waiting for her to continue. "I realize how much this trip must mean to you both," Samantha continued, gesturing slightly toward where Mildred was still asleep, curled under the blanket. "I remember how excited you looked when you boarded, and I ruined that experience for you. That was wrong of me." Harold sighed softly, looking down at his hands. "We've been planning this vacation for so long," he said, his voice tinged with quiet sadness. "We never expected to be separated, especially after all these years. But I do appreciate you coming to me now." Samantha felt a lump in her throat. It was one thing to suspect that you'd hurt someone, but to hear it directly made the guilt heavier. "Is there anything I can do to fix this?" she asked, her eyes finally meeting Harold's. He studied her for a moment before a gentle, understanding expression crossed his face. "I think what's done is done," he replied. "But maybe next time, remember that people come in all forms. We don't always match what you expect, but we have our reasons for being here." The simple sincerity of his words humbled her more than any lecture could have. She nodded, blinking back tears. "Thank you," she managed. "I promise I'll learn from this. Please, let me know if there's anything you or Mrs. Anderson need." Harold gave her a faint smile. "Thank you, young lady. I appreciate the gesture." With that exchange, a small measure of relief settled in Samantha's chest. She knew she wasn't absolved of her wrongdoing, but she felt she had taken the first step toward righting it. The flight was far from over, and the memory of her blunder would linger, but she held on to the hope that she could at least salvage the remainder of the trip for the Andersons. As she turned to walk away, she saw Mildred stir and open her eyes, meeting her gaze from across the aisle. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, an understanding passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the pain caused, and perhaps a sense that some healing was beginning. Samantha smiled tentatively, and Mildred returned it with a small, tired but appreciative nod. The remainder of the flight passed in a quieter, more reflective haze. Samantha tended to her duties with a renewed gentleness. She double-checked on the Andersons from time to time, offering them snacks or warm towels, each gesture an attempt to convey her regret. Though the atmosphere still buzzed with the aftermath of the morning's conflict, there was a sense that the tension had begun to ease. Some passengers, having overheard parts of Samantha's apology to Harold, offered her understanding smiles. Others remained aloof, uncertain whether to sympathize or judge. In the back of her mind, Samantha wondered what would happen once the plane touched down. Would there be a formal complaint, an investigation into her behavior? The dread of possible disciplinary action loomed large, but ironically, it was overshadowed by her concern for how the Andersons felt. She realized that even if she managed to keep her job, she would never forget this incident, and perhaps that was a good thing. It would serve as a reminder of how easy it was to let authority overshadow humanity. As she passed Mildred's seat one last time before the plane began its descent, Mildred reached out and gently touched Samantha's arm. "Thank you," she said softly, tears brimming in her eyes. "For understanding." Samantha's chest tightened with emotion as she nodded, unable to fully articulate her response. A single word, "thanks," slipped out, carrying with it a weight of gratitude and relief. In that fleeting moment, she understood that the real journey had little to do with the flight's destination and everything to do with learning to serve with compassion. By the time the plane landed, she hoped she had found a small place in the hearts of Harold and Mildred Anderson, enough to overshadow the harsh beginning they had endured. It wasn't a perfect solution, nor could it erase what had happened, but it was a start. And in Samantha's mind, sometimes a start was all one needed to begin to change. Samantha Taylor stared at her reflection in the small mirror affixed to the crew station's wall. For a fleeting moment, she didn't recognize the woman gazing back. Her eyes were shadowed with fatigue and worry, her normally flawless bun slightly askew. She pressed her lips together, then forced herself to take a deep, steadying breath. The short lull in first-class service offered her a brief respite. The plane was cruising through calm skies, but inside her mind, a storm of conflicting emotions raged on. Several hours had passed since she'd apologized to Harold Anderson for forcing him and Mildred apart. The couple, who had exuded a poised and unassuming presence, still occupied seats in the first-class cabin, albeit not side by side. While Harold had received her apology with a calm politeness, Samantha sensed a lingering tension in the air. She was aware that she needed to speak to Mildred as well, to acknowledge the distress she'd caused both of them, not just the husband. Yet she couldn't bring herself to face Mildred's quiet disappointment a second time. In her years of service, Samantha had prided herself on her ability to remain unflappable, to address even the most challenging passengers with grace and a polite, controlled demeanor. Her authority in the cabin had never been questioned. She was, after all, the unwavering guardian of first-class standards. But now, that authority felt hollow, exposed for the rigid shell it had become. Perhaps she had always used protocol as a means of masking her own insecurities, her need to impose order where she feared chaos. As she mulled over these thoughts, the lead flight attendant, a poised woman named Marissa Nguyen, approached. Marissa had been quietly observing the situation ever since Samantha's initial confrontation with the Andersons. Known for her empathetic approach to customer service, Marissa had chosen to give Samantha space to resolve her own conflict. But now, it seemed she felt compelled to step in. "Samantha," Marissa said softly, "how are you holding up?" Samantha hesitated, her gaze flicking to the reflection in the mirror one last time. She saw the uncertainty in her own eyes. "I'm trying," she admitted, turning to face Marissa. "I apologize to Mr. Anderson. He seemed to accept it, but I can't help feeling that everything's changed in here, like the cabin is under a cloud." Marissa nodded sympathetically. These situations can do that. The energy shifts, and everyone feels it. But you've taken the first step by apologizing to him. Have you spoken to Mrs. Anderson yet? A twinge of guilt tightened Samantha's chest. Not exactly. She was resting earlier, and I guess I've been putting it off. Marissa gently placed a hand on Samantha's shoulder. It's understandable, but remember that an apology can go a long way, especially if it's sincere. They deserve to hear that you regret your assumptions, both of them, not just Mr. Anderson. The rest of the passengers might forgive and forget if they see genuine remorse, but continuing to avoid Mrs. Anderson might keep the tension alive. Samantha exhaled, nodding. You're right. I've been so worried about what she might say, or whether she'd accept my apology at all. But I know I need to do it. Marissa offered a small, encouraging smile. You do. And I believe you can handle it. You're a good flight attendant, Samantha, but we all have our blind spots. Recognizing them is how we grow. With Marissa's quiet encouragement fueling her resolve, Samantha decided it was time to face Mildred. The next moment of opportunity came when the overhead lights dimmed for the cabin's late-night phase. Some passengers were preparing to sleep, while others quietly read or watched movies. Samantha gathered her courage, stepping away from the crew station to approach Mildred's seat. Mildred Anderson was awake, gazing out the window at the moonlit clouds. A small reading light illuminated the lines of her face, revealing a thoughtful expression tinged with sadness. Samantha approached, her steps tentative. She cleared her throat softly to announce her presence, not wanting to startle Mildred. "Mrs. Anderson," she said gently. Mildred turned to face her, eyebrows raised in mild surprise. Samantha felt her heart pound at the sight of Mildred's eyes, which held a quiet, unwavering dignity. It reminded her so much of Harold's steady demeanor, though there was a distinct tenderness behind Mildred's gaze. "I'm sorry to bother you," Samantha continued, her voice trembling just enough to betray her nerves, "but I wanted to speak with you about, earlier, if that's all right." Mildred studied her for a moment, then inclined her head with a gesture of invitation. Samantha took the seat across the aisle, leaning in so they could speak without disturbing the other passengers. She noticed that the seat next to Mildred was still empty, a stark reminder of the separation she had caused. "I owe you an apology," Samantha said, her hands folded on her lap. "I made assumptions when you and Mr. Anderson boarded. I believed that you didn't fit the profile of typical first-class passengers, and I insisted on separating you two. That was unfair, and it was cruel. I never intended to cause you distress, but I see now that I did." Mildred's face held a certain gentleness, but also a guarded skepticism. "I appreciate your honesty," she replied quietly, "but you have to understand how humiliating it was. We only wanted to enjoy this trip together. We were so excited, and then, well, it felt like a door was slammed in our faces." Samantha nodded, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "I realize that now. Believe me, if I could go back and change how I handled things, I would. But I can't. What I can do is promise to learn from this. I lost sight of what my job really is, to make sure everyone feels welcomed and cared for, not just to maintain some rigid standard of who belongs where." Mildred's expression softened at the sincerity of Samantha's words. She let out a breath that seemed to carry away some of her tension. "We've traveled a lot over the years, you know. We've been to so many places, flown with so many airlines, but it's rare to be met with, well, with the attitude we encountered today. It was surprising, coming from Celestial Air. We had chosen this airline because of its reputation for excellent service and warmth. Samantha bowed her head slightly, ashamed. I betrayed that reputation, and I'm so sorry. This airline means a great deal to me, and I never wanted to tarnish its name or make you feel unwelcome. I let my personal assumptions override my professionalism. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet of the cabin seemed amplified in the dim light, the only sounds being the soft rustle of blankets and the gentle snoring of a few sleeping travelers. Finally, Mildred placed a hand on Samantha's arm. The gesture was light but held a surprising warmth. Thank you for your apology, Mildred said, her voice hushed but steady. I can see it's sincere. We all make mistakes, Samantha, what matters is how we grow from them. Samantha felt a flood of relief, gratitude, and lingering guilt wash over her. She managed a weak smile, nodding in acknowledgement. Thank you for giving me a chance. I promise you, I'll do everything I can to make the rest of this flight better for both you and Mr. Anderson. Mildred returned the small smile. I appreciate that. My husband and I, we've been through a lot in life. We were just looking for a peaceful journey together. Maybe next time, we won't have to worry about such misunderstandings. Samantha stood, feeling a glimmer of hope. I'll see if I can manage to reunite you two somehow. Even if the official assignments are strict, there might be a solution. Before Mildred could respond, Samantha offered a polite nod and made her way toward the front of the cabin. She felt lighter, as though the storm inside her had begun to calm. Apologizing to Mildred hadn't magically erased her mistake, but it had opened a path toward resolution. Now, the question was whether she could persuade the lead flight attendant or the seat assignment system to allow the Andersons to sit together for the remainder of the trip. The plane was only halfway to its destination, after all. When she reached the crew station, she found Marissa and Gwyn speaking quietly with another flight attendant. At Samantha's approach, Marissa turned, her expression serious. How did it go with Mrs. Anderson? She asked. A small, genuine smile tugged at Samantha's lips. She heard me out. I apologized, and I believe she accepted it. Marissa's shoulders relaxed visibly. That's good. Now, we have another issue. I received a notification from ground control. It seems someone has lodged a complaint regarding an altercation in first class. They didn't provide details, but it's likely connected to the Andersons. Samantha's heart sank. She had suspected this might happen, but the weight of it still pressed down on her. What does this mean for me? She asked, her voice quieter than before. Marissa sighed. We'll handle it internally first. The airline has procedures for investigating these kinds of complaints. Depending on the outcome, there might be additional training or disciplinary action. I can't promise anything, but I'll do what I can to make sure they understand you've shown remorse and tried to make amends. Samantha swallowed, nodding in acknowledgement. I understand. With no immediate solution available, the best she could do was carry on with her job, ensuring the rest of the flight proceeded smoothly. She busied herself with offering refreshments, dimming overhead lights for passengers who wished to sleep, and politely checking on individuals with special requests. Despite the tension, she found that focusing on concrete tasks helped keep her mind off the dread of potential repercussions. Later in the flight, Samantha noticed Harold Anderson standing at the front of the cabin, cane in hand, politely trying to get her attention. She approached him, concern flickering across her features. Mr. Anderson, is everything all right? She asked softly, worried she had yet again overlooked something. He gave her a reserved smile. Everything is fine, Miss Taylor. I was just wondering if there was any chance I could sit next to my wife. We've traveled so far just to share this experience together. Her heart twisted at the gentle request. She should have been the one offering him that seat without making him ask. Let me see if I can arrange something, she replied. I apologize I didn't handle this sooner. Harold nodded, gratitude in his eyes. I appreciate it. At that moment, Samantha realized the seat next to Mildred had remained vacant for most of the flight. There was no pressing reason Harold couldn't move there now. The only issue was the official seat assignment. Summoning her courage, Samantha went to confer with the lead flight attendant at the computer console. After a short discussion and some keystrokes, they reassigned Harold's seat to Mildred's row. It was a small victory, but an important one. Samantha escorted Harold back to his wife's side, a sense of relief washing over her as the couple thanked her with warm smiles. Mildred's eyes sparkled with both appreciation and lingering sadness for what had transpired, but there was a measure of forgiveness in them that gave Samantha hope. As the flight neared its final hour, Samantha walked the aisle one last time, ensuring all passengers were settled. The hush of the cabin was now a restful stillness, not the fraught tension it had been. Many travelers dozed under blankets, lulled by the steady drone of the engines. Harold and Mildred sat close together, speaking in hushed tones, their expressions warm and content despite the challenges of earlier. In that quiet moment, Samantha paused at their row, offering them a final smile. She didn't speak, nor did they, but the air between them felt lighter, like a chapter was closing, and a better one might open. Samantha knew the road to repairing her professional reputation might be long. The complaint lodged against her could result in a formal inquiry. Yet she felt she had taken a necessary step. She had confronted her biases, apologized, and made an effort to restore dignity to the Andersons' journey. When the plane began its descent, Samantha resumed her usual role of ensuring safety protocols were followed, checking seat belts, securing tray tables, and assisting any last-minute requests. For the first time in hours, she felt a semblance of calm. The lesson she had learned was profound: a flight attendant's duties extended far beyond routine enforcement of rules. It involved empathy, understanding the humanity of each passenger, and recognizing that sometimes the guidelines had to yield to compassion. As wheels touched down on the runway, the plane taxied toward the gate, and the seatbelt sign blinked off, marking the end of the flight. Samantha wondered what awaited her at the airline's headquarters: an interview, a reprimand, or perhaps more training. She was anxious, but also resolute. She would face whatever came next with humility, determined to grow from this experience. In the bustle of disembarking, Harold and Mildred lingered until the aisle cleared. Samantha instinctively stepped forward to help them with their carry-ons. Mildred turned, a smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you for letting us sit together for the rest of the flight," she said softly. "We appreciated it." Harold nodded in agreement, placing a gentle hand on Samantha's arm. "We all have lessons to learn, Miss Taylor. We wish you the best in yours." A wave of emotion threatened Samantha's composure, but she blinked it back, managing a heartfelt smile. "Thank you both. I truly am sorry for the trouble." They nodded one last time and stepped off the plane, disappearing into the terminal crowds. Samantha stood at the aircraft door, watching them go, her heart heavier and lighter all at once. She couldn't help but feel she had narrowly averted a much worse outcome, but also that the incident would linger as a cautionary reminder of the pitfalls of assuming authority without empathy. The last passenger descended, and the cabin emptied out. Samantha began her post-flight checks, ensuring everything was in order for the cleaning crew. As she worked, she reflected on the day's events, how easily she had slipped into an unfeeling role, how quick she had been to judge based on superficial impressions. She vowed that from this point forward, she would approach every passenger with openness, resisting the urge to impose her own biases or illusions of control. By the time Samantha exited the plane, the night had settled over the airport. The terminal's lights cast long shadows across the gleaming floors. She walked through the concourse, uniform crisp, posture upright, but mind racing with thoughts of what would happen next. As she reached the staff exit, she paused, glancing back one final time at the aircraft that had witnessed her mistake and her first steps toward making amends. Though the day had begun with error and tension, it ended with the seed of transformation. Samantha Taylor knew that the real flight she was embarking on was not measured in miles or altitudes, but in personal growth and the capacity for genuine service. 1. Post-flight reality. Samantha Taylor stood at the airport's employee exit, the day's final rays of sunlight filtering through the tall glass windows. After the tumultuous flight, she cradled her uniform jacket over one arm, feeling uncharacteristically weighed down by regret. The confrontation with Harold and Mildred Anderson had ended hours ago, but the echoes of that tension still rang in her mind. She couldn't shake the image of Mildred's tear-brimmed eyes or Harold's calm, yet wounded expression. Although she had found a moment to apologize to them both, it felt insufficient. A bandage slapped hastily over a wound that needed deeper care. Her co-worker, Marissa Nguyen, approached with measured steps, concern etched on her face. "You heading home?" Marissa asked gently. Samantha nodded, inhaling slowly. "I need to rest. This day's drained me more than I'd like to admit." Marissa's gaze flicked to a cluster of employees murmuring across the hall, presumably discussing the events from the flight. "Just be aware, word's traveling fast. The airline's top management has heard about the incident with Mr. and Mrs. Anderson. And, well, you know how these things go." Samantha clenched her jacket tighter. "I expected that. It was a matter of time. I made an error, and there's no hiding it." Stepping outside, they both felt the crisp evening air wash over them. The hum of taxi engines and passenger chatter was oddly comforting, an unchanging routine in a day that had upended Samantha's self-assured worldview. She parted ways with Marissa, offering a faint wave before heading to the staff parking lot. In the stillness of her car, the gravity of her predicament pressed in. She was no longer merely Samantha Taylor, excellent flight attendant. She was now the flight attendant who had singled out an elderly couple, ironically the very people who symbolized the airline's legacy, Harold and Mildred Anderson. 2. A formal summons the next morning, the shrill ring of Samantha's phone jolted her awake far earlier than she'd planned. The voice on the other end was crisp and businesslike, human resources from Celestial Air, requesting her presence in an urgent meeting. Her stomach tightened, she knew this was about the Andersons. The official complaint had likely triggered an internal review. Part of her wanted to call in sick, to hide from the consequences, but she pushed the thought aside. This was a moment she had to face. 45 minutes later, Samantha navigated the corridors of Celestial Air's headquarters, each step echoing in her ears like a judge's gavel. She passed receptionists who greeted her with polite nods, and colleagues who offered fleeting sympathetic smiles. News traveled fast in an airline as large as Celestial, and she could nearly feel the hush of whispered rumors wrapping around her. Eventually, she arrived at a small conference room where a plaque read, "Personnel Relations." Summoning her courage, she pushed open the door. Inside sat two individuals, one she recognized as Annette Dorsey, head of HR for the cabin crew division, and the other, an executive she'd only ever seen in emails, Graham McAllister, a senior vice president. Their expressions were neither hostile nor welcoming, simply professional, revealing little of what Samantha should expect. "Ms. Taylor," Annette began, motioning for Samantha to sit, "we appreciate you coming in promptly. Let's talk about the incident on Flight 407 with Mr. and Mrs. Anderson." Samantha's mouth felt dry. She licked her lips, folding her hands in her lap. "Of course." Graham leaned forward, fingers laced on the table. "We've received a complaint detailing that you separated the Andersons, longtime partners and significant figures in Celestial Air's history, for reasons that appeared to be personal bias. They were assigned first-class seats together, yet your decision placed them apart, causing distress and confusion. Is that accurate?" Samantha exhaled, nodding. "Yes, sir. That's essentially correct. I believed I was enforcing standard seat assignments, but I also made assumptions about them that influenced my decision." Annette's brow furrowed. "It states here that you questioned their right to be in first class, possibly due to their appearance and age. Is that fair to say?" The words struck Samantha like a blow, even though she'd expected them. "I won't deny it," she admitted quietly. "I was misguided. I let my preconceived ideas overshadow my professional duty to ensure their comfort. I did apologize to them both in flight, and I attempted to rectify the seating, though it was quite late in the journey." Graham tapped a pen against his notebook, assessing her with a calm, measured gaze. "We've also heard from other crew members that you've been a model flight attendant for years." Strict, yes, but efficient. This is the first serious complaint we've ever received about you. Can you explain what led to this lapse? Samantha hesitated, heart pounding. I can only say that I lost sight of empathy. I was stressed, trying to maintain order, and I allowed my personal assumptions to guide me instead of the airline's commitment to service. I truly regret it. 3. Witnesses and testimonies. To Samantha's surprise, Annette slid a folder across the table containing witness statements from other first-class passengers and the flight crew. Samantha read them with mounting shame. Phrases like dismissive tone, apparent bias, and unnecessary distress jumped out at her. Her throat constricted, and she fought to maintain composure. The memories of Harold and Mildred's quiet dignities weighed on her, intensifying her remorse. They've accepted your apology, Graham said, flipping through his notes, but the Andersons have also emphasized that this incident reflects a broader problem in how some staff approach their duties. They've suggested additional training for all attendants, focusing on empathy and bias awareness. Samantha felt a ray of relief. She had half expected the Andersons to demand her termination. The fact that they'd recommended training rather than punishment spoke volumes about their character. I would wholeheartedly support such training, she said earnestly. In fact, if it's allowed, I'd like to be directly involved in shaping that. I need to make amends, not just for them, but for the airline's reputation and my own professional growth. Annette nodded, lips curving in a slight smile. That kind of initiative is what we'd hope for, Ms. Taylor. Still, we can't ignore the severity of this event. There will be consequences. 4. Consequences and reflection. Annette concluded the meeting by outlining the steps. Samantha would receive a formal letter of reprimand, to be placed in her employee file. She would also be placed on a short probationary period, during which her interactions with passengers would be under closer supervision. Additionally, she was to undergo a newly designed training module focusing on compassionate service and unconscious bias. Leaving the conference room, Samantha felt simultaneously burdened and oddly liberated. The potential punishments had been far worse in her imagination: complete dismissal, or a prolonged suspension. Instead, she had a chance to prove she could change. Although the letter of reprimand stung her pride, she accepted it as a necessary step. Outside, in the corridor's bright overhead lights, she paused to collect herself. The day felt surreal, each moment overshadowed by the knowledge that she had disappointed not just the airline's leadership, but her own sense of who she was as a flight attendant. She recalled a saying from her initial training: a flight attendant's authority is measured not by strictness, but by the comfort and respect they give. She had allowed herself to forget that truth, and now she was paying the price. 5. A chance encounter. 2 days later, as Samantha prepared for her next assignment, an unexpected development occurred. She was called to a different flight gate, last minute. The lead flight attendant on that route had fallen ill, and the airline needed Samantha to fill in. Normally, she would relish such an opportunity. It was a sign they still trusted her skill. But given her recent trouble, she couldn't help feeling anxious, worried that another misstep could seal her fate. Approaching the gate, Samantha took note of the flight's destination, a cross-continental route, typically favored by business executives and wealthy retirees. Her nerves flared at the thought of encountering another Anderson-like scenario if she let her biases flare again. She vowed to keep her composure, to treat each passenger with heightened sensitivity. Boarding time arrived, and Samantha stood at the cabin door, greeting travelers as they stepped aboard. Some offered curt nods, others friendly smiles. She welcomed them all with a practiced grace she'd honed over her career. But her stomach clenched each time a passenger who didn't fit the typical first-class mold walked by. She reminded herself, never again. She refused to repeat the error that nearly cost her everything. During the flight, Samantha found herself meticulously checking on passengers, ensuring no one felt overlooked. If someone seemed out of place to her eyes, she made a conscious effort to be extra welcoming, reminding herself that everyone's story was unique. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, a gentle satisfaction settled over her. Perhaps this was what growth felt like, being on constant guard against one's own worst impulses. 6. A humbling return. When Samantha's plane touched down at Celestial Air's main hub that evening, she caught sight of a figure who made her heart skip a beat. Standing by the gate, leaning on a cane and gazing out over the concourse, was Harold Anderson himself. Beside him was Mildred, and both seemed engrossed in a quiet conversation, their backs turned to the passing crowds. For a moment, Samantha wondered if they were there by coincidence or if their presence signaled a more official follow-up. Her mind raced. She recalled that the Andersons were not just ordinary passengers but held a place of deep respect within the airline's legacy. Harold and Mildred had once been integral to the founding of Celestial Air, after all. Summoning her courage, she approached them slowly, unsure of whether they'd want to speak with her again. Hearing her footsteps, Harold turned. A friendly glimmer lit his eyes, though his expression remained composed. Mildred, too, offered a polite, measured smile. It was a far cry from the tension Samantha had caused during their previous encounter. "Mr. Anderson, Mrs. Anderson," Samantha greeted them, her voice gentle. "It's nice to see you again. I hope you've been well." Mildred nodded, clasping her hands in front of her. "We have, thank you." "And you?" Samantha paused, weighing her words. "I'm learning," she admitted. "I'm part of a new training program now, one that aims to fix the exact mistake I made. I wanted to thank you for suggesting that to the airline. It means a great deal to me that you believed I could improve, rather than just calling for my dismissal." Harold's eyes flickered with something akin to pride or relief. "We never wanted to see you lose your career," he said simply. "We've always believed that mistakes, painful as they are, can be catalysts for growth." Mildred added, "We appreciate that you took the time to apologize back on the plane. And it seems the airline is taking steps to ensure this doesn't happen again. That's more than we expected." Samantha's breath caught. She realized she was near tears, overwhelmed by the Andersons' graciousness. "Thank you. Truly. I can't take back what happened, but I promise I'll do whatever I can to ensure no other passengers feel how you did that day." The couple exchanged a warm glance. Mildred rested her hand softly on Samantha's arm. "That's all we needed to hear." 7. A new initiative. In the subsequent weeks, Samantha's professional life took a dramatic turn. At first, she served her probationary flights under the watchful eye of supervisors, each flight meticulously documented to track her interactions with passengers. But to her relief, she discovered that the act of consciously practicing empathy, of actively challenging her assumptions about who belonged, enriched her job rather than constraining it. She found joy in connecting with travelers who came from all walks of life, families with young children, retirees fulfilling lifelong travel dreams, even quiet business types who appreciated a friendly smile. Meanwhile, Celestial Air, spurred by the Andersons' suggestions, began formulating a new training module called Compassion in the Skies. This module was set to be required for all cabin crew. To Samantha's surprise, she was invited to be part of the pilot group, not as a punishment, but as someone whose recent experience could inform the program. She hesitated at first, uncertain if her perspective was truly valuable, or if it would brand her forever as the attendant who messed up. Yet the leadership was insistent that real growth came from acknowledging mistakes and learning from them. Reluctantly, Samantha agreed. The program was more intensive than she'd expected, covering psychology of bias, real-life case studies, and role-playing scenarios designed to highlight how easily flight attendants could slip into patterns of snap judgments. Samantha recognized echoes of her own misjudgment in nearly every example. Despite the pangs of guilt, she found the process cathartic. She realized that her earlier sense of absolute authority had been a shield against her own insecurities, fear of being unable to handle disruptive passengers or maintain order if she didn't keep a strict facade. 8. Encounters with the past. One afternoon during a training break, Samantha wandered through the airline's corporate museum, a small, glass-walled space showcasing the history of Celestial Air. Curiosity guided her to a section dedicated to the airline's founders. Photographs of Harold and Mildred Anderson stared back at her from decades past, a testament to their pioneering vision. They looked younger, full of ambition and warmth, as they posed in front of the first Celestial Air aircraft. Samantha felt an ache in her chest, recalling how she had nearly forced them apart in a seat they had once dreamed of creating. A voice from behind startled her. They were quite the dynamic duo, weren't they? Turning, she found Captain Nathaniel Hayes. He'd been passing through the building, and spotting Samantha in the museum, decided to approach. She nodded, swallowing her nervousness. I had no idea how central they were to all of this. I mean, I read about them in training once or twice, but I never connected the dots until that incident. Nathaniel gave a small, understanding smile. Most new hires see Harold and Mildred as iconic names in the company's origin story, but rarely do they think they'd actually meet them in person. Let alone on a random flight. Samantha sighed, eyes lingering on the photo of the couple in their youth. Meeting them the way I did was humbling, to say the least. Nathaniel nodded. It's good to see you taking that humility and channeling it into this new program. I've heard excellent feedback from your instructors. They say you're open, honest, and are offering valuable insights. She felt a flicker of relief. I'm trying to be. It's not easy to talk about my own flaws in front of everyone, but if it helps them understand how biases can creep in, maybe it's worth the discomfort. Captain Hayes's expression turned serious. Samantha, people appreciate sincerity. Admitting mistakes is a sign of strength, not weakness. The fact that you're here, learning from it, is more than many do. I'm proud of your progress, and I know the Andersons would be too. Her chest tightened at those words, but in a good way. Thank you, Captain. 9. A meeting of reconciliation. A few more weeks passed. Samantha continued working flights under her probation, gradually regaining the trust of her colleagues. Passengers seemed to sense her renewed commitment to empathy. Complaints turned into compliments, seat assignments were enforced, but always with a respectful, person-centered approach. Then one day, she received an official memo requesting her presence at a reconciliation gathering, a small event to be held in one of Celestial Air's executive lounges. Confused, Samantha skimmed the details. It was an informal reception, hosted by Harold and Mildred Anderson, to discuss the new Compassion in the Skies program and address any lingering tension from the incident. The notice indicated that Samantha's attendance was specifically requested. The day of the gathering arrived. Samantha arrived at the lounge, noticing the grandeur of the space typically reserved for VIP events. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside. The lounge was decorated with fresh flowers, and a handful of Celestial Air executives mingled about. In the center stood Harold and Mildred, conversing with Marissa and Gwyn and a few other attendants. Samantha inhaled slowly, reminding herself that she had come a long way since that ill-fated flight. At the sight of her, Harold waved her over with a smile. Samantha. Glad you could make it. She approached, nerves fluttering but also a growing sense of gratitude. Mr. Anderson, Mrs. Anderson, I wasn't expecting this invitation. Mildred chuckled softly. Well, we've heard how involved you've become in the new training program. We wanted to show our support. Plus, she added, exchanging a warm look with her husband, we believe it's important that the staff sees us not just as founders on a pedestal, but as people who understand mistakes can happen, and who appreciate sincere efforts to learn. Samantha felt her eyes prick with emotion. That means a lot, more than I can say. I've learned so much since that day, and I owe it in no small part to your forgiveness. Their conversation was soon joined by Captain Hayes and Annette Dorsey from HR. The group spent the next hour discussing ways to integrate real-life experiences into the training, highlighting empathy, dignity, and the dangers of letting personal biases interfere with professional responsibilities. Samantha found herself opening up about her initial mindset, how she had confused enforcing the airline's high standards with shutting people out. Harold nodded thoughtfully, remarking, standards don't have to exclude compassion. If anything, compassion is part of the highest standard an airline can offer. 10. A renewed purpose. By the end of the evening, Samantha felt an unexpected sense of closure. She had not only come to terms with her error but was actively helping shape a future that would prevent others from making the same mistake. Harold and Mildred expressed genuine admiration for her transformation, and their acceptance was the balm she needed to fully move past her guilt. As she left the lounge, she reflected on how far she had come. The humiliating incident in first class had been the spark igniting her realization that a flight attendant's role was about more than just rule enforcement. It was about welcoming every passenger, every soul, with the respect they deserved. Over the next few months, Samantha threw herself into the new training program, traveling to different bases to speak to fellow attendants. She shared her story openly, the shame, the apology, the path to redemption. Many listened with rapt attention, recognizing in Samantha's story the potential pitfalls of letting authority overshadow empathy. Some attendants approached her afterward, confessing that they too had judged passengers prematurely. Others thanked her for being brave enough to admit her failings and show a way forward. In time, the story of Samantha's misstep and redemption became part of Celestial Air's internal culture, an example that encouraged employees to see behind appearances, to pause and question whether they were upholding the airline's ideals or merely reciting them. Far from being disgraced, Samantha emerged with a renewed sense of purpose. Her uniform, once a symbol of authority and control, now represented service and compassion. She realized that mistakes, as painful as they were, could serve as catalysts for profound personal and organizational growth. Epilogue: One day, after a particularly successful flight where she'd guided a whole family traveling with a grandparent, Samantha noticed a small envelope among her personal items in the crew station. Inside was a note from Harold and Mildred Anderson. It read simply, "Dear Samantha, we wanted you to know that we see the difference you're making. Thank you for believing that no one is too old, too different, or too unexpected for a seat in first class. You've honored your apology through your actions, and we couldn't be prouder of how far you've come. Warmly, Harold and Mildred." A tear slipped down Samantha's cheek as she reread the words. She quietly folded the note and tucked it into her pocket, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude and closure. In that moment, she understood that redemption wasn't about erasing a mistake, it was about letting the lessons learned from it guide you toward a better version of yourself. And as she stepped back into the first-class cabin to greet a new set of passengers, she did so with a heart brimming with humility, ready to serve with genuine warmth, ever mindful that every traveler had a story she might never know, and every seat in first class was, in its own way, a seat of honor. 1. The calm before the storm. Ever since the public apology in the subsequent rollout of the new training program at Celestial Air, Samantha Taylor found herself living in a new professional landscape. The tension she'd once carried, born of self-doubt, pride, and inflexible rules, had slowly begun to dissipate. In its place was a quieter conviction, a commitment to treat every passenger with genuine empathy. She had stepped into a leadership role within the Compassion in the Skies initiative, sharing her cautionary tale of how a single misjudgment had nearly cost her everything. Several months had passed since her last conversation with Harold and Mildred Anderson. Despite their gentle reassurance and gracious forgiveness, Samantha still occasionally felt the sting of that memory. Walking through the halls of Celestial Air's headquarters, she would sometimes pause at the museum's exhibit, where photos of the Andersons building the airline from scratch reminded her of the raw power of humility. These visits weren't about guilt anymore, they were about reflection, about remembering the airline's core mission to serve travelers of all walks of life. Her day-to-day flights had grown smoother. She found new joy in the small interactions that made the job special, the elderly woman traveling to see her newborn grandchild for the first time, the nervous business executive worried about an important pitch. Samantha's approach had shifted from strict enforcement of rules to a mindful balancing act that considered personal circumstances. Passengers noticed. Compliments replaced complaints, and Samantha's colleagues remarked on how her presence now exuded a warmth they hadn't seen before. In the back of her mind, Samantha wondered if she was truly tested. Had she faced a difficult scenario similar to what she'd imposed on Harold and Mildred? Would she remain steadfast in her renewed ideals, or would old habits resurface under stress? Despite her improvements, she couldn't help feeling that a crucial test still lay ahead, one that would prove beyond doubt that her transformation was genuine. 2. A new flight assignment. It arrived in the form of Flight 1721, an unusual route that combined business travelers, a VIP group, and a smattering of retirees returning from a cruise. The flight spanned multiple time zones and was known for its length and complexity, often requiring a specially trained crew adept at handling varied passenger needs. The airline's leadership, seeing Samantha's progress, decided to place her in charge of first class for Flight 1721. When Samantha saw the assignment pop up in her schedule, she felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This would be her largest test since the Anderson incident. The passenger manifest included an intriguing variety of customers, wealthy entrepreneurs, high-profile artists, a handful of older couples, and, unbeknownst to Samantha at the time, someone with direct ties to the Anderson family. On the morning of the flight, Samantha arrived at the bustling terminal earlier than usual, her mind set on meticulous preparation. The overhead screens displayed Celestial Air Flight 1721, departing Gate 34. She made her way there, greeting her co-crew members with a warm smile. The lead flight attendant, Marissa Nguyen, gave her a supportive nod. It was the same Marissa who had been by Samantha's side during her meltdown months ago, and who had since watched her transform. "We'll do great today," Marissa said confidently, handing Samantha the passenger manifest. Scanning through the list, Samantha noted the presence of a certain Charles Baxter, an older passenger with an open seating request due to mobility challenges. It reminded her of the day she first met Harold Anderson, and she felt a pang of both nostalgia and caution. She resolved to treat Mr. Baxter with the utmost care, ensuring not to repeat her previous mistake of letting assumptions color her service. 3. The boarding, an unexpected reunion boarding began smoothly. Among the first to step into first class were the usual array of businesspeople, anxiously checking emails and making phone calls even as they settled into their seats. Samantha moved among them, offering a friendly greeting, guiding them to store their luggage, and providing pre-departure beverages. So far, everything seemed routine. Then came an older man with a cane, moving slowly but with an air of independence. His thick-rimmed glasses and calm demeanor brought an instant flash of memory for Samantha. He resembled Harold in certain ways, though he wore a wry smile that hinted at a playful spirit. Samantha approached him immediately. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Baxter. May I assist you to your seat?" He peered over his glasses, a half-amused grin on his lips. "Why, thank you. That's kind of you. My seat is 1A, I believe." Samantha confirmed. "That's correct. Right this way." She led him to the spacious first-row seat, ensuring his cane was properly stowed. "Please let me know if there's anything I can do to help you get comfortable." His eyes twinkled. "I appreciate it. You're Samantha, right? I heard about you from someone quite dear to me." A ripple of curiosity passed through her. "Oh. May I ask who?" "Harold and Mildred Anderson," he replied, his tone holding a friendly warmth. "They're old friends of mine, and the reason I'm on Celestial Air today. They insisted I try out the best airline around." Samantha's heart jolted at the mention of Harold and Mildred. She forced a polite smile. "That's wonderful. They are, indeed, special people to this airline." Charles nodded, picking up on her subtle tension. "They sure are. They spoke highly of a certain attendant who once made a mistake but did a great deal to remedy it. They told me you'd learned a big lesson that ended up benefiting the airline as a whole." Her cheeks warmed. She wasn't sure how to respond, so she just said, "They were very gracious to me, more than I deserved." He nodded gently. "Harold and Mildred believe in second chances. I do too." 4. The flight takes off with everyone settled, the plane taxied down the runway. Samantha proceeded with the standard pre-flight checks, her mind drifting to Charles Baxter's words. She realized this was more than just a routine flight. He was here, in some part, to see whether Celestial Air, and Samantha, truly lived up to the new standard the Andersons had encouraged. She felt a surge of resolve. She had to ensure his experience was the best it could be. Once the seatbelt sign switched off, Samantha glided through the cabin offering warm towels, beverages, and the day's menu. The first class was fully booked, 13 travelers occupying the plush seats, each with distinct demands. 2 seats behind Charles was a famed actress accompanied by an entourage seated in business class. Across the aisle, a newlywed couple gazed dreamily at each other, while an older woman traveling alone looked apprehensive about the upcoming multi-time zone trek. Samantha moved with calm efficiency, responding to each passenger's needs with a soft smile and genuine warmth. Every so often, she'd check on Charles, who appeared content, though occasionally wincing from what looked like a stiff back. She gently offered an extra pillow, adjusting his seat to a more comfortable recline. He nodded in thanks, praising the refreshing change he saw in Celestial Air's approach, an indirect nod to the training program that Samantha had helped shape. 5. A new challenge mid-flight, things took a sudden turn. One of the business travelers, a Mr. Delgado, realized he was missing a critical briefcase containing important documents for his upcoming meeting. Frustrated and on edge, he flagged Samantha over, venting about how the airline staff must have misplaced his item. Samantha listened attentively, her calm not wavering. She offered to double-check the overhead bins and storage compartments. She also requested the ground crew at the last stop verify if the briefcase was left behind at the gate. Meanwhile, tensions in the cabin rose as Mr. Delgado's anxious outbursts began to agitate nearby passengers. Samantha felt the eyes of the entire first-class cabin on her, particularly Charles Baxter's. She recognized this scenario as a test of her new approach, maintaining composure, empathy, and dignity for both the panicked passenger and those indirectly affected by his agitation. Carefully, she guided Mr. Delgado through the steps to locate his bag, compassionately acknowledging his stress without dismissing him. Eventually, an update from ground control indicated the briefcase wasn't at the gate, implying it might still be on board. Working in tandem with the rest of the crew, Samantha initiated a thorough search. She quietly apologized to other passengers for the disruption. To soothe the environment, she offered complimentary beverages and reassurance that the staff was handling the matter swiftly. Despite Delgado's rising impatience, she remained gentle yet firm, demonstrating a balanced authority guided by empathy rather than inflexible demands. Her efforts paid off when the briefcase was discovered, accidentally wedged behind a row of seats in business class. When she returned it to Delgado, his relief was palpable. He thanked Samantha profusely, though still flustered by the ordeal. The tension in the cabin eased, replaced by an appreciative buzz. For Samantha, the moment felt like a small victory, a chance to demonstrate that empathy and calm, not rigid control, could preserve order and satisfy everyone's needs. 6. The strain of a long flight. As Flight 1721 flew deeper into its route, fatigue set in for both passengers and crew. The multi-time zone journey tested everyone's patience. The famous actress demanded elaborate accommodations for her meals, scowling if the flight attendants didn't respond instantly. The newlywed couple, suffering from motion sickness, needed special care. An older gentleman seated behind Charles Baxter required assistance with medication every few hours. Samantha juggled these requests gracefully, though she occasionally felt overwhelmed. Marissa Nguyen, her lead, periodically checked on Samantha's well-being. "You good, Sam?" she asked during a brief pause at the galley. Samantha managed a wry smile. "It's busier than I expected, but so far, so good. I'm actually enjoying the challenge." Marissa gave an approving nod. "That's what growth looks like. Keep it up." Samantha also found a few pockets of time to chat with Charles. He asked about her experiences in the new training program, remarking on how Harold and Mildred spoke highly of the modules she'd helped draft. She found herself describing the case studies and role-playing scenarios that hammered home the risk of letting unconscious biases affect passenger treatment. Charles listened intently, occasionally sharing his own opinions on courtesy and service in the airline industry. The conversation felt natural, a testament to Samantha's renewed ability to connect with travelers beyond the surface. 7. Turbulence and a medical emergency. About 3/4 into the flight, the seatbelt sign dinged on. The aircraft hit a patch of turbulence, jolting drinks and rattling overhead compartments. Samantha instructed passengers to remain seated, her voice level but urgent as she reassured them everything was under control. She'd handled turbulence countless times, yet her pulse quickened, some deep part of her worried that any crisis could trigger old habits of reasserting authority and forgetting empathy. The turbulence intensified. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, informing them that they'd navigate around a storm cell. As Samantha collected unsecured items, a distressed call reached her ear. A passenger near the front, a middle-aged woman named Miss Phelps, was experiencing sharp chest pains. Panicking, Miss Phelps moaned softly, pressing a hand over her heart. Fear flickered in her eyes, overshadowed by acute discomfort. Samantha's training kicked in. She swiftly moved to Miss Phelps' side, kneeling despite the shaking plane. "Miss Phelps, can you describe what you're feeling?" she asked, projecting calm. Miss Phelps stammered something about a history of high blood pressure, tears of pain welling in her eyes. "Stay with me," Samantha said. She signaled Marissa and another attendant to bring the medical kit and the onboard defibrillator just in case. They alerted the captain, who radioed for potential emergency landing instructions. As the turbulence rocked the cabin, Samantha guided Ms. Phelps to take slow, measured breaths, offering reassurance as she rummaged for the passenger's medication in the overhead bin. During the chaos, Samantha caught a fleeting glance at Charles Baxter. Though he appeared worried, he offered an encouraging nod. She took a breath, remembering the fundamental principle she'd only recently embraced: focus on the person's well-being, not just the procedure. She spoke gently to Ms. Phelps, asked if there was anyone traveling with her who could provide more info, and swiftly administered the medication Ms. Phelps indicated was for such episodes. Minutes crawled by. The turbulence subsided enough for the captain to stabilize the flight path, while Ms. Phelps' chest pains gradually eased under the medication's effect. The crisis passed, leaving Samantha both exhausted and relieved. She felt gratitude wash over her when Ms. Phelps grabbed her hand, whispering a quavering thank you. That small gesture reminded her why she became a flight attendant in the first place: to help people, to be a calming presence in their vulnerable moments. 8. A quiet resolution. With the turbulence behind them and Miss Phelps resting more comfortably, the flight settled into an uneasy calm. The overhead speakers announced they'd be landing in a few hours. Samantha circulated through the cabin once more, ensuring everyone felt safe after the frightening ordeal. Her shift in approach was evident. She engaged each passenger with genuine concern, an aspect that no rulebook could have taught her. Eventually, she reached Charles Baxter, who observed her with a quiet, pleased smile. "You've handled a lot today," he said softly. "From missing briefcases to medical scares. Quite a flight." Samantha couldn't help but let out a breathy laugh. "Yes, it's been intense. But I don't know, calmer than I would have been in the past." Charles inclined his head, as though acknowledging the transformation. "Harold and Mildred were right about you. They said once you realized the heart of your job, you'd become unstoppable in the best way." Heat rose to Samantha's cheeks, a mix of pride and humility. "I owe them more than I can say. They opened my eyes to how easily we can fall into the trap of thinking we know who belongs. And the truth is, everyone belongs." 9. Touching down. When Flight 1721 finally touched the runway at its destination, the plane erupted in spontaneous applause, a release of tension after a flight that had tested them all. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began collecting their belongings with a mixture of relief and lingering adrenaline. Samantha made her way to Ms. Phelps, ensuring she was stable enough to disembark. Medical staff waited at the gate in case she needed further attention. With heartfelt thanks, Ms. Phelps told Samantha she'd be sure to write a commendation for her calm, empathetic care. She found Mr. Delgado, the man who had lost his briefcase, wrapping up a phone call with a colleague. He caught her eye, gave a sheepish grin, and mouthed a thank you. Samantha merely nodded, gratified that he could face his business meeting with his documents secure. Lastly, she sought out Charles Baxter. He waited patiently in his seat, cane by his side, letting the rush of other passengers go by. Samantha approached, offering to help him with his carry-on. He accepted with a gracious nod. "Miss Taylor," he said with a twinkle in his eye, "it's been quite a journey. Harold and Mildred will be pleased to hear how you handled yourself today. You demonstrated precisely the kind of thoughtful service they spoke of." Samantha felt her throat tighten with a wave of gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Baxter. I I'm grateful for the chance to prove I'm not the same person who caused them distress all those months ago. Charles stood, leaning on his cane as Samantha held his carry-on. You've proven it well, he said. Keep up this good work, and I have no doubt you'll continue to rise in this airline. It takes humility to recognize a mistake, and courage to change because of it. As they made their way off the plane, Samantha felt a profound sense of closure. The flight had tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated, challenging seat assignments, a near medical emergency, a hodgepodge of demanding passengers, but she had navigated it all without reverting to the rigid attitudes that once defined her. This was the test she'd subconsciously been waiting for, the chance to show she had truly learned. 10. Looking ahead in the subsequent days, Samantha's performance on Flight 1721 circulated among Celestial Air's ranks. The official feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Passengers praised her empathy and swift action. Marissa Nguyen reported that morale among the first-class crew had never been higher. Word even reached the training department that Samantha's approach served as a model scenario for new attendants practicing real-world crisis management. Harold and Mildred Anderson, upon hearing from Charles Baxter, sent Samantha a short message: "Proud of your progress, keep leading by example. H&M." The note was taped to her locker, a daily reminder of the moment she had turned a near tragedy into a stepping stone for personal growth. Emboldened by these experiences, Samantha worked with the training program's leadership to refine the "Compassion in the Skies" curriculum. She introduced new role-play scenarios inspired by the flight's events, from missing items to medical emergencies and the delicate balance of serving high-profile or anxious passengers. Her story, once a source of personal shame, became a teaching tool for others, demonstrating that authority alone was hollow without empathy. Soon, a new wave of flight attendant trainees joined Celestial Air, each hearing about Samantha Taylor's transformation, from the attendant who had separated a beloved elderly couple to the empathetic professional lauded for saving the day on Flight 1721. Samantha, still humble about her past, found herself stepping into an informal mentorship role. She guided the newcomers, reminding them of the airline's founding principles: everyone belongs here, and no seat is too exclusive for genuine kindness. Months later, Samantha found herself in a place she never expected, the same first-class galley, arms folded in quiet satisfaction as the plane soared smoothly at 35,000 feet. The seat assignments were once again at capacity, but gone was the sense of dread that used to accompany that. Now, she saw each passenger as someone with a story, someone who deserved understanding, not a burdensome occupant of a seat. She had come full circle. Her letter of reprimand remained in her file, yes, but it no longer symbolized shame, it was a testament to her transformation. Celestial Air, under the watchful gaze of Harold and Mildred Anderson, had blossomed into an airline that stood for warmth and inclusivity, with Samantha as a shining example of what growth could look like after a mistake. On a calm evening flight, as she walked the aisle to check on a passenger who had quietly fallen asleep, Samantha paused to glance out the window. The sunset stretched across the horizon in brilliant gold and orange. She thought of the Andersons, remembering how one misjudgment had set this entire journey in motion, leading her from rigidity to redemption. She allowed herself a small, contented smile. People could change. She had changed. "Ms. Taylor," called a passenger from a few rows ahead. Samantha snapped out of her reverie. "Yes, how can I help?" The passenger requested a warm blanket. Samantha retrieved one promptly, her heart light, her spirit renewed. With each flight, each passenger aided, each small moment of compassion offered, she drew one step further from the person she had been and closer to the one she aspired to be. Months had passed since Samantha Taylor solidified her reputation as a flight attendant who embodied compassion, humility, and genuine care for passengers. Her once rigid adherence to protocol had evolved into a balanced approach that blended the airline's high standards with an unwavering commitment to empathy. Celestial Air, under the watchful guidance of its founders, Harold and Mildred Anderson, had embraced the shift wholeheartedly. One brisk morning, Samantha arrived at Celestial Air's main terminal for what she assumed would be a routine day. The bright overhead lights highlighted the swirl of travelers hustling to their gates. She greeted her colleagues cheerfully, stowing her purse in the employee locker area. Just then, an unexpected announcement crackled over the PA system. "Attention Celestial Air staff, please report to the Aurora Conference Hall for an urgent briefing in 10 minutes. Samantha exchanged a curious glance with her coworker, Marissa and Gwyn. Typically, announcements like this were reserved for major corporate updates, new routes, leadership changes, or emergent policy shifts. The two hurried toward the hall, weaving through curious employees gathering from various corners of the terminal. The Aurora Conference Hall brimmed with anticipation. Flight attendants, pilots, ground crew, all stood or sat in clusters, speculating about what was in store. At the front stood Harold and Mildred Anderson, the airline's legendary founders, along with several high-ranking executives. Samantha noted how, despite their advanced age, the Andersons radiated a calm vigor that commanded the room. When they stepped forward, hush fell across the crowd. Harold's voice, steady yet warm, resonated. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've called you here to share exciting news about the future of celestial air. Our airline has always prided itself on excellence, but in the past year, we've seen a remarkable transformation in how we serve our passengers. It's time to take that evolution even further." A sense of awe stirred in Samantha. She recalled her journey, the mistakes she'd made, the new training modules she'd helped shape, the redemption that had turned her from an enforcer of rules to a genuine caretaker of travelers. She wondered if this announcement might be related to the Compassion in the Skies program, or perhaps a brand new initiative. Whatever it was, the Andersons' presence signaled that it would be significant, and Samantha felt a small thrill at being part of it all. Mildred stepped forward, her gentle yet clear voice filling the hall. "We're announcing the creation of a new specialized fleet within Celestial Air, named after a principle we hold dear, compassion. This fleet will serve as a model for personalized, human-centric service, an extension of the training programs we've been refining over the past year. We're calling it the Anderson Legacy Initiative." A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. Samantha felt an instant spark of curiosity. How would this specialized fleet differ from the rest of Celestial Air? And what role would she play in this new chapter? Mildred explained further, "The Anderson Legacy Initiative will be a set of planes outfitted with additional comforts, broader aisles for passengers with mobility issues, expanded seating options for couples or families wishing to stay together, and an onboard environment that fosters interaction and care. This initiative isn't just about a physical upgrade, it's about the spirit of service we aim to cultivate." Harold took over, his calm gaze passing over the employees. "We want volunteers, people who believe in the renewed vision we've seen blossom in our airline. In particular, we'll need senior attendants who can guide newer staff, ensuring each flight in the Anderson Legacy fleet upholds the highest standard of empathy. Over time, we hope these methods trickle down to every flight in our network, but we're starting with a dedicated program to perfect them." Samantha's heart fluttered. Over the last several months, she had come to embody the transformation the Andersons spoke of. She had lived it. She glanced at Marissa, who shot her a knowing smile. The older flight attendant placed a supportive hand on Samantha's shoulder. "You should apply," Marissa whispered. "If anyone exemplifies what they're talking about, it's you." Without hesitation, Samantha nodded. She'd spent the past year building the new training modules, reconciling her mistakes, and forging genuine connections with passengers. The idea of helping spearhead an entire fleet designed around empathy felt not just like a professional step forward, but a personal calling. At the front of the room, Harold and Mildred concluded their announcement, inviting questions. A pilot in uniform raised his hand, asking about the timeline. Another staff member asked about potential pay differentials or extra training requirements. Through it all, Samantha listened intently, formulating her own plan. She felt a surge of confidence as she resolved to volunteer, certain that she could help shape the initiative into something truly groundbreaking. When the briefing ended, staff filed out, abuzz with speculation and ambition. Samantha lingered near the stage, waiting for a chance to speak privately with Harold and Mildred. At last, Harold noticed her and beckoned her over with a genial smile. "Ms. Taylor," he said warmly, "we had a feeling we'd see you up close after this announcement." Mildred chimed in, "Yes, we remember your determination. We hoped you'd consider joining this new fleet." Your journey was an example of how an airline can change, one person at a time. Samantha's pulse quickened. I'd love to volunteer. It would be an honor to help implement these new standards. I know firsthand how a shift in mindset can transform the passenger experience. Sharing a nod, the Andersons seemed pleased. Consider yourself part of the team, Harold said, offering a handshake that felt like a solemn seal. We're counting on you to bring compassion to new heights. In the weeks following the announcement, Samantha found herself in a whirlwind of preparations. After formally volunteering, she was assigned as a lead attendant for the first wave of Anderson Legacy Initiative flights. The airline commissioned several aircraft with specialized interiors, each fitted with wide-aisle designs, convertible couple seating, and extended overhead compartments, aimed at reducing stress for older or mobility-challenged passengers. The presence of a small lounge area within these planes spoke to Celestial Air's ambition to foster community and warmth in the skies. Each day, Samantha met with a newly assembled team, flight attendants of varying experience, all excited, and a bit nervous, about the project's pioneering status. She introduced them to the refined training modules, walking them through real-life scenarios that demanded quick thinking and empathy. Some attendants marveled at the detail, like role-playing a scenario in which a newlywed couple, traveling with an elderly parent, required seating accommodations that clashed with standard assignment logic. Guiding them, Samantha was careful to emphasize that the initiative wasn't about ignoring rules but about employing them with flexibility and compassion. For instance, she'd say, pointing to a training manual, if a passenger's wheelchair placement might pose a minor inconvenience for service flow, we find a workaround rather than just turning them away. Our first question should be, how can we accommodate and still maintain safety? Rather than, what do the rules say about having them in this aisle seat? This mindset changes everything. The transformation was thrilling yet stressful. Samantha juggled her ongoing flights with daily meetings, sometimes working into the late evening. She attended briefings with the engineering department to understand the new plane's configurations. She joined calls with marketing to ensure the public understood the philosophical shift behind the Anderson Legacy flights. And, of course, she spent hours mentoring the new recruits who were both intrigued and overwhelmed by the concept of forging a more empathetic cabin atmosphere. Amid this bustle, she almost forgot about the letter of reprimand that once loomed large in her career. One afternoon, as she cleared her employee mailbox, she found a memo stating that her probationary period had ended and that, pending continued good performance, her record could be amended to reflect her new standing. The relief nearly brought tears to her eyes. It felt like the final ghost of her old self had been laid to rest. She carefully placed the memo in her purse, thinking about how Harold and Mildred's acceptance and her own dedication had made this redemption possible. When the day came for the first official Anderson Legacy flight, Flight 2201, departing from Evergreen City to a major international hub, Samantha arrived at the gate brimming with nervous energy. The plane, newly christened Spirit of Compassion, gleamed at the jet bridge. She recognized familiar faces among the crew. Marissa was there to support, along with a handful of enthusiastic newcomers who had aced the advanced training. She also spotted a group of executives, including HR head Annette Dorsey, on board as observers. In the bustling gate area, Samantha took a moment to close her eyes, inhaling a calming breath. She pictured Harold and Mildred, their warm smiles, and told herself, this is for them. This is for every passenger who deserves to be recognized, not just processed. She opened her eyes, stepped forward, and welcomed the first passenger aboard with a renewed sense of purpose shining through her smile. The flight's passenger manifest included a name that quickly caught Samantha's attention, a certain Ms. Victoria Shaw, a well-known philanthropist and public speaker widely admired for championing elder care. Ms. Shaw was traveling with her personal assistant, presumably heading to a global summit on aging populations. Samantha recognized her from several humanitarian news articles. The presence of Ms. Shaw could be a blessing or a curse, a high-profile passenger who might highlight the success, or failure, of the new empathy-based approach. When Ms. Shaw boarded, Samantha noticed she moved with a slight limp, using a discreet walking stick. The personal assistant hovered anxiously, fussing over small details. Samantha approached with her typical grace. Ms. Shaw, welcome aboard. My name is Samantha Taylor, and I'll be ensuring your comfort today. Ms. Shaw offered a polite smile, glancing at the seat arrangement. Thank you, Ms. Taylor. I appreciate Celestial Air's new initiative. I've heard many good things about the changes here. Samantha nodded, guiding Ms. Shaw to her specially designed seat with extra foot space. We're proud to be launching this new approach, and I'll do everything to make your experience exceptional. Even as Ms. Shaw settled, a small hitch arose. The personal assistant realized the seat next to Ms. Shaw had been assigned to another passenger who had specifically requested a window. The assistant politely asked if Samantha could reassign that passenger so Ms. Shaw and the assistant could sit side by side for easy communication and care. Samantha felt a flicker of déjà vu. This was precisely the kind of scenario that once triggered her impulse to rigidly enforce seat assignments. But she recalled her training. This was a chance to show how they could adapt. First, Samantha politely approached the assigned passenger, a middle-aged business traveler named Mr. Cordova, explaining Ms. Shaw's situation. To her relief, Mr. Cordova was amenable to switching seats if it didn't greatly inconvenience him. With a few keystrokes on her handheld device, Samantha found a seat in the same class that still offered a window. She gave Mr. Cordova the option. He happily agreed. The matter was resolved in minutes, no tension, no embarrassment. Ms. Shaw watched the brief negotiation from her seat. When Samantha returned, Ms. Shaw caught her eye, offering a gracious nod. Thank you for handling that so efficiently. Small kindnesses like these can make a world of difference. A flutter of satisfaction warmed Samantha's chest. This was exactly the type of scenario the Anderson Legacy Initiative aimed to handle with empathy. She felt no urge to assert control or cling to rules. Instead, she solved the problem with a flexible, passenger-focused approach. Observing from across the aisle, Marissa and Gwyn flashed Samantha a proud grin. The difference in Samantha's methods was apparent to everyone witnessing the exchange. Shortly after the seat switch, a sudden whisper coursed among the cabin crew. Harold and Mildred Anderson were rumored to be on the passenger list for a connecting flight at the next stopover. They weren't physically present on Flight 2201, but the mention of their name caused a ripple of excitement. Samantha suspected they might appear at some point, perhaps to quietly observe how well the new system worked in real conditions. The possibility made her heart race with a mix of eagerness and anxiety. Although she'd come far, she craved the Andersons' continued blessing, wanting to prove that her transformation was more than a fleeting redemption. But the flight soon encountered literal turbulence. A weather system forced the captain to alter the route, triggering mild bumps. Passengers stiffened with anxiety, but Samantha kept her composure. She moved from row to row, offering calm assurances. In the old days, she might have snapped at travelers who didn't comply with seatbelt rules. Now, she knelt beside anyone who seemed frightened, softly explaining how turbulence worked and verifying their comfort. The real emotional turbulence arrived when a disheveled passenger in economy class stumbled forward into first class, evidently upset about a missed meal due to dietary restrictions. Samantha recognized him as Mr. Khalil, a father traveling with a child who required a special diet. The meal had apparently been mishandled, leaving them hungry. Though he had no official reason to be in first class, Samantha gently guided him to the side, out of earshot of Ms. Shaw and the others. She apologized sincerely for the oversight, promised to rectify the issue, and quickly arranged for a suitable meal from the premium stock. She then personally delivered it to Mr. Khalil's seat in economy. The incident tested her capacity to remain gracious under stress. Yet again, she succeeded in maintaining empathy, forging a human connection with him. The meltdown that had once characterized her approach to interlopers simply did not resurface. Each challenge reconfirmed her new worldview. After hours in the air, the captain announced the final descent. Samantha felt a familiar flutter of relief. The flight had proven intense, but she had navigated every hurdle with confidence and compassion. The seatbelt sign chimed, and she made her final checks through the cabin, verifying that Miss Shaw, Mr. Cordova, Mr. Khalil, and every other passenger were prepared for landing. When the plane's wheels gently kissed the runway, applause and cheers erupted from a handful of passengers, an almost nostalgic tradition, more common on flights known for difficult routes or major changes. Samantha realized in that moment that they were applauding not just a safe arrival but the success of something new, a flight that exemplified Celestial Air's renewed approach to service. She sensed a communal pride in the air, like everyone recognized they'd just participated in a milestone flight for the airline. Upon disembarking, Ms. Shaw paused at the aircraft door, turning to face Samantha. "Your airline is truly living up to its compassionate mission. Thank you for your kindness. I've flown many times, but rarely have I felt as genuinely cared for." Samantha bowed her head. "It was my pleasure, Ms. Shaw. Safe travels to your conference." The philanthropic figure's compliments echoed a sentiment that many other departing passengers shared. As Samantha oversaw final checks in a now empty cabin, she allowed herself a moment to savor the sense of accomplishment. This flight had tested her on multiple fronts: seat confusion, weather turbulence, special meal requests, and she had triumphed by leaning on empathy rather than rigid enforcement. Yet she knew her journey didn't end with one successful flight. The Anderson Legacy Initiative was a living, evolving project, demanding consistent growth from all participants, including herself. She felt ready for it, determined to keep pushing the envelope of passenger care. With the plane's engines cooling, ground crew bustled about, preparing for the next flight. Samantha and her team tidied the first-class cabin, ensuring every seat was arranged for the upcoming wave of travelers. She was just about to sign off her shift when Marissa rushed in, eyes sparkling. "Samantha, guess who's here?" Harold nodded, leaning on his cane. "We heard great things from Ms. Shaw," he added, referencing the high-profile passenger who'd evidently given them feedback. "She mentioned your calm demeanor, your willingness to adapt seat assignments, and your quick action to help a father from economy. Sounds like you've been busy." Samantha felt a rush of emotion. "It's been challenging, but in a good way. The initiative is working, thanks to your vision, and the guidance you both gave me." Marissa joined the conversation, giving the Andersons a quick update. Samantha handled everything from a brief medical scare to dietary issues. "She's become the embodiment of empathy in the skies." Harold and Mildred shared a look of pride. "We're so glad," Mildred said softly. "Everything we hoped. Like you, people willing to challenge their old ways and embrace a better model of service." Samantha's eyes misted. She remembered how, once, she had nearly separated them over trivial assumptions, unknowingly insulting the very founders of the airline. Now they stood together, bridging the gap with mutual respect. It was surreal, almost too perfect a culmination. But it felt real, a testament to second chances fully realized. Mildred turned to Harold, exchanging a nod. Harold cleared his throat. "Samantha, there's one more thing." He reached into his jacket pocket, retrieving a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter on elegant stationery bearing the Celestial Air crest. "We'd like to invite you to an official ceremony next month. It's the official launch of the entire Anderson Legacy fleet. We'll be inaugurating 10 planes with the new design and specialized training staff. We'd be honored if you'd attend as a keynote speaker." Samantha's breath caught. "Me? But I'm just one attendant who," Harold lifted a hand to gently halt her. "Not just anything. You're the reason we knew this change was truly possible. Your story, your redemption. It's the perfect illustration of how Celestial Air can adapt to serve passengers of all backgrounds." A hush fell, broken only by the faint hum of the plane's climate controls. Samantha blinked away the moisture in her eyes, scanning the faces of the couple who once confronted her with silent grace. "I'd be honored," she finally managed, voice trembling with gratitude. "I won't let you down." 1 month later, Samantha stood in a gleaming event hall at Celestial Air's main terminal, wearing a crisp uniform and an expression of awe. Banners displayed the Anderson Legacy Fleet, honoring compassion in the skies. Beneath those banners, rows of seats filled with journalists, crew members, executives, and supporters. A small stage had been erected at the far end, overlooked by a large projection screen featuring highlights of the new plane's interior modifications. She hadn't expected a large crowd for such an internal ceremony. But evidently, the world was curious about Celestial Air's bold experiment in empathy-driven service. Cameras flashed as local reporters captured the excitement. Samantha lingered backstage, nerves fluttering. She saw Harold and Mildred seated in the front row with serene expressions, making conversation with a smiling Ms. Shaw, who'd come to champion the effort. Also present were members of the Compassion in the Skies training team, many offering Samantha encouraging nods. When her turn came, the MC invited her to the podium, introducing her as one of the key figures behind Celestial Air's heartfelt transformation. Applause erupted, far more than she felt she deserved, but she clung to that appreciative energy like a lifeline. She took a deep breath, scanning the crowd until she found the comforting gaze of Harold and Mildred. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began. Her voice carried a slight tremor, but she pressed on. "I stand here today, proud to represent the new direction Celestial Air has embraced. As many of you know, we've launched the Anderson Legacy Initiative, a fleet dedicated to ensuring every passenger is not just accommodated, but truly welcomed. It's been a journey, one that taught me personally how vital empathy is in an airline setting." She then recounted her story in broad strokes, how she once believed first class was an exclusive space for a certain type of passenger, how her encounter with Harold and Mildred made her recognize her unconscious biases, and how she dedicated herself to changing. She also highlighted the real-world success of Flight 1721, describing how quick thinking and genuine empathy had resolved multiple passenger issues without friction. "Ultimately, we discovered that compassion needn't conflict with safety or efficiency," Samantha said, her voice steadying as her confidence grew. "In fact, it enhances them. Passengers who feel seen and respected are calmer, more cooperative, and more trusting of our crew. We reduce misunderstandings and foster a sense of unity on board, a sense that we're all in this journey together." As Samantha concluded, Harold rose to lead the applause, followed by Mildred and the rest of the audience. The warmth in the room was tangible. She felt tears well in her eyes, but managed to keep a professional composure. She stepped off the stage, where the Andersons greeted her with gentle hugs. Ms. Shaw offered a heartfelt compliment. That was precisely what the world needs to hear, an airline worker championing empathy as a core value. After the ceremony, Samantha mingled with reporters and well-wishers, fielding questions about how, precisely, the new fleet would differ from standard flights. She explained the practical changes, wider aisles, adjustable seating for couples or families, and the intangible shift in training that emphasized personal connections. Journalists asked if the initiative had faced any pushback from traditionalists, and Samantha candidly admitted that some employees were skeptical at first but quickly saw the tangible benefits of happier passengers and fewer altercations. In a quiet corner of the hall, Samantha found herself alone for a moment with Mildred. They exchanged a warm smile, the older woman's eyes shining with pride. "It's remarkable," Mildred said softly, "to see how you've grown from that day we first met. You've turned what could have been a career-ending mistake into the catalyst for an entire cultural change in Celestial Air." Samantha inhaled, emotion thick in her throat. "I owe it to you and Mr. Anderson. If you'd punished me harshly instead of encouraging me to learn, I might never have discovered the joy of Real service." Mildred squeezed her hand. "We saw potential in you, Samantha. Not everyone seizes that chance. Be proud of what you've done, and keep going." As the crowd began dispersing, a representative from Celestial Air's Human Resources Department approached Samantha. He introduced himself as Lionel Grant, a Strategic Development Officer. "Miss Taylor," Lionel said, "on behalf of the Executive Committee, I wanted to personally thank you for your role in shaping the Anderson Legacy Initiative. We're extremely impressed. I've been asked to gauge your interest in a more permanent leadership role within the program." A flicker of excitement coursed through her. "Leadership role? As in?" Lionel smiled. "As in overseeing the entire first-class training aspect of the new fleet. You'd still fly from time to time, of course, but your primary responsibility would be ensuring each plane in the Anderson Legacy lineup maintains the standard. You'd also refine the training modules, keep them updated, and serve as a liaison between flight attendants and upper management." Samantha felt momentarily speechless. This was more than she dared to hope for. A chance not just to practice empathy but to institutionalize it. I'm honored, she finally managed. We'd like your formal response soon, Lionel said, but I'm sure it's a yes, given your dedication. We'll contact you with details about compensation, scheduling, and so forth. Samantha's heart soared. She found her mind racing with ideas, interactive sessions for attendants, curated experiences for passengers requiring specialized attention, bridging the gap between standard operating procedures and the real human needs on board. She thanked Lionel, who left her with a congratulatory handshake. Later that evening, with the ceremony behind her, Samantha slipped away to a quiet observation deck near the airport's private lounges. From there, she could see planes taking off and landing under the dying light of dusk. The sky glowed in shades of pink and gold, a fitting backdrop to the transitions swirling within her thoughts. She considered how drastically her life had changed in the past year. From an attendant who once separated Harold and Mildred Anderson out of misguided authority, she had now become an emblem of empathy in the airline. She was about to accept a leadership role that could shape Celestial Air's service culture for years to come. A soft voice spoke behind her, and Samantha turned to see Harold and Mildred approaching once again. Mildred gave a warm smile. Escaping the crowds, are we? Samantha nodded, returning her gaze to the horizon. I needed a moment to let it all sink in. Today was surreal. Thank you both for trusting me with so much. Harold, leaning on his cane, looked toward the runway. We're the ones who should be thankful, Samantha. You've transformed a single mistake into a legacy that can help thousands, maybe millions, of passengers find comfort in flight. She swallowed, tears pricking at her eyes again. I'm just grateful for your patience. If you'd filed a major complaint or demanded I be fired, none of this would have happened. Mildred chuckled softly, stepping to Samantha's side. We've lived long enough to know that people deserve second chances. You took yours and flourished. We only gave you a nudge in the right direction. They watched in peaceful silence as a plane roared down the runway, its lights blazing in the evening gloom. Samantha couldn't help imagining that plane as a vessel of kindness, carrying travelers who might face a myriad of personal challenges. She felt an almost sacred responsibility to keep building on the Anderson legacy, ensuring that every seat, every aisle, was a place of welcome. When Harold finally turned to leave, he placed a fatherly hand on Samantha's shoulder. Keep going, he said simply. Remember, empathy doesn't end with a single flight or a grand ceremony, it's a day-by-day practice. Samantha felt the gravity of his words settle like a gentle warmth in her chest. I will, Mr. Anderson. Every single day. And with that quiet promise, she faced the luminous runway once more, a plane in the distance disappearing into the violet sky. It was a perfect metaphor for her own journey, once turbulent and uncertain, now ascending into a brighter horizon. In the hush of that moment, she found a sense of calm determination, a deep faith that no matter what future challenges arose, she would meet them with the same empathy that had become her guiding star. Samantha Taylor stood at the window of Celestial Air's headquarters, watching the plane's taxi in the early morning light. Another busy day awaited her, but she couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. She'd come a long way since the ordeal that forced her to confront her biases and nearly derailed her career. Now, as the newly appointed leader of the Anderson Legacy Initiative's first-class training program, she held a responsibility she'd never imagined. Shaping the airline's future in harmony with Harold and Mildred Anderson's vision of empathy-driven service. Despite the sunrise glow on the runway, a swirl of nerves lodged in Samantha's stomach. In less than an hour, she would be boarding Flight 2630 to Pacific Shore, leading a specialized workshop in flight for a group of trainees who had yet to apply the compassion in the skies approach on a real route. It was a new method of instruction, hands-on, mid-flight training that allowed novices to experience real-time passenger interactions while Samantha guided them from behind the scenes. She turned from the window as Marissa Nguyen, her longtime colleague and friend, stepped in. Ready, Sam? Marissa asked, wearing an encouraging smile. Samantha nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. She glanced at the clock on her phone. Harold and Mildred texted me earlier, wishing me luck, saying they're eager to hear how the in-flight workshop goes. No pressure, right? Marissa chuckled. You'll do great. You've already proved it, flight after flight. This is just the next step, passing that wisdom on so others can carry it forward. Samantha appreciated the confidence. She grabbed her flight bag, hoping to harness the sense of calm she'd cultivated over these past months. The fiasco that once defined her, a misguided attempt to separate the Andersons, had transformed into her catalyst for personal growth. Now, every flight was an opportunity to reaffirm that serving with empathy was not just an ideal, but a practice. 1. Pre-boarding preparations. 15 minutes later, Samantha and Marissa arrived at Gate 22. A brand new Boeing 900 in Celestial Air's livery awaited them. This particular aircraft, Heartsong, was part of the Anderson Legacy Initiative fleet, specially outfitted with wide aisles, flexible seating, and a smaller passenger capacity than a typical first-class cabin, aiming to enhance personal interactions. Inside the gate area, a group of 10 flight attendants in crisp uniforms stood in a semicircle, chatting excitedly. They were the novices Samantha would be instructing mid-flight, each sporting a name tag and an anxious grin. Recognizing the mixture of eagerness and nerves in their eyes, Samantha approached with a warm greeting. Hello, everyone. I'm Samantha Taylor. I'll be guiding you through today's immersive training. It's a pleasure to meet all of you. They introduced themselves in turn, voices hushed with respect. Among them was a tall, quiet man named Devin Reeves, who seemed particularly shy, and a bold young woman named Beatrice Lane, exuding outspoken confidence. Another, a steady, middle-aged attendant named Carmen Soto, appeared calm, perhaps carrying a wealth of prior experience from another airline. Samantha studied each of their expressions, recalling her own early days when arrogance overshadowed humility. In today's workshop, Samantha continued, we'll explore the Anderson Legacy approach while serving real passengers. You'll see how to handle seat reassignments, special requests, mobility issues, and most importantly, how to maintain empathy under stress. Some of you might find it challenging to adapt from older methods, but trust me, once you experience the difference empathy makes, you'll never go back. Marissa chimed in, if you need anything, or if a situation arises that's not covered in the manual, signal Samantha or me. We'll guide you. This is hands-on training, so don't be afraid to try new approaches, just remember the golden rule, treat passengers as people, not problems. The trainees nodded in unison, collecting their gear as final boarding announcements filled the air. Samantha felt a twinge of nerves for them. This was the first time Celestial Air had attempted such an immersive approach, letting rookies shadow real first-class operations during an actual flight. But she believed wholeheartedly in the concept, especially after seeing the dramatic improvements empathy had brought to the airline. 2. The first-class cabin setup. Once on board, Samantha and Marissa led the novices through the first-class cabin, pointing out the modifications that set the Legacy fleet apart. Plush seats were arranged in pairs or single pods, each convertible depending on whether a passenger traveled solo or with company. Handrails ran discreetly along aisles, helpful for older travelers. Overhead compartments were lowered for easier access, and a lounge nook allowed for brief, casual congregations if seatbelt sign was off. See these adjustable seats? Samantha explained, demonstrating how a seat could pivot to face another. This is so couples or families can maintain eye contact. But it's also for passengers who might be anxious. Sometimes talking face-to-face helps them feel less isolated. Your job is to see if a passenger situation calls for it. The trainees nodded, eyes bright with fascination. Devin Reeves tentatively asked, what if we misjudge? Like, if a passenger actually wants privacy but we assume they need interaction? Samantha offered a reassuring smile. Always ask first. Don't impose solutions. Offer. Compassion means giving them the choice. If they decline, respect that. Beatrice Lane raised her hand. And the lounge nook, what if, say, a passenger just wants to lounge around but starts disturbing others with loud phone calls or something? Marissa answered, you'd politely intervene, reminding them the lounge is for quiet interaction or relaxation. The moment a passenger's choice impacts others negatively, you step in with calm but firm guidance. The difference from old approaches is that you approach with empathy, not an iron fist. The explanation triggered a wave of thoughtful expressions among the novices. In the back of Samantha's mind, she remembered how she once viewed strict seat assignments as an ultimate rule. Now she realized flexibility could exist without sacrificing safety or order. The challenge was to maintain a watchful eye for each passenger's comfort. 3. Passengers begin boarding soon. Real passengers started trickling in. The novices, each assigned to shadow a specific aspect of first-class operations, took positions near the aisles. Samantha stood by the door, greeting travelers with a bright smile. For many, this was their first experience on the newly configured Heartsong, and they gazed around with curious delight. One passenger was an older gentleman with a cane, echoing the memory of Harold Anderson. He carried a battered briefcase and wore an antique watch. Another passenger, a pregnant woman traveling alone, looked relieved by the extra space. A third, a middle-aged business executive, juggled multiple phone calls. The novices carefully stepped in to help store luggage or direct them to seats, while Samantha subtly guided them to approach each situation with warmth. She watched with pride as they remembered to ask questions, like, "Would you prefer your seat in couple mode or single mode?" rather than imposing their own assumptions. A slight hiccup arose when the pregnant woman, Ms. Delacroix, expressed concerns about needing the restroom frequently. She worried she might inconvenience a seatmate. Sensing her anxiety, Carmen Soto politely offered to reassign Ms. Delacroix to an aisle seat near the lavatory. Samantha gave a subtle nod of approval from across the cabin. This was precisely the empathy-based, flexible approach they'd spent weeks discussing in training. 4. A return of old baggage. Just as everything seemed to be going smoothly, a commotion broke out near row 2C. The business executive, Mr. Hastings, discovered that a younger passenger had taken the seat next to him, a seat Mr. Hastings insisted should remain vacant so he could spread out his documents. He demanded the novices relocate the younger man, claiming the seat was effectively mine. The novices faltered, uncertain how to handle his sense of entitlement. Samantha stepped in, quietly observing. She recognized that Mr. Hastings had purchased only one seat, yet believed first class gave him extra privileges. In the older, more rigid days, an attendant might have told the younger passenger to find an alternative seat if free, or simply told Mr. Hastings to abide by the manifest. But the novices looked to Samantha for a response consistent with the new approach.